I could still smell the cigar smoke when I stormed out of his office. It clung to the heavy oak-paneled walls like a stain that no amount of polish could hide. The same way my father's words clung to me, sinking deep into my skin, burning hotter with every step I took down that endless marble hallway. This is not up for discussion. Catherine, you'll make a fine wife one day. This firm is for your brother to manage. Over and over, like a hammer to the ribs. I pushed open the front door of Mercer Manor, the icy air of the Texas winter hitting my face so hard it stung. For a second, I just stood there on the porch, staring out at the sprawling acres of land that had been in our family for generations. The driveway curved elegantly through a manicured garden, every hedge trimmed perfectly, every tree pruned to show just enough wildness to seem natural but not enough to offend. Just like me, I thought bitterly, groomed, molded, trimmed into someone who looked the part but was never meant to lead. I wasn't supposed to want more. I was supposed to smile, marry well, and maybe volunteer for some nice charity so they could put my name in the society pages alongside my father's and brother's achievements. But I didn't want that life. I wanted my seat at the damn table. And tonight had made it crystal clear that no matter how hard I worked, no matter how many late nights I pulled at Harvard or how many cases I crushed as a young associate, it would never be enough. Not with a last name like Mercer. Not with a father stuck in the 1950s. I heard the door creak behind me. I didn't have to turn around to know it was my mother. Catherine, she called gently, her voice barely above a whisper. Please, sweetheart, come inside. I didn't move. She stepped closer, her heels crunching softly against the gravel. Your father, he's set in his ways. But he loves you. He doesn't know how to show it. I let out a laugh, sharp and bitter. Yeah, well, he has a funny way of showing it, I said, blinking back the sudden sting behind my eyes. You know, Mom, for a second, I thought maybe tonight would be different. I thought maybe he'd look at me and see more than a daughter he needs to marry off like a business transaction. Her silence was answer enough. I turned to face her then. And for the first time, I saw the exhaustion lining her face, the way the years had worn her down into someone who accepted things she should have fought against. And suddenly, it clicked. She wasn't just asking me to come inside. She was asking me to stay quiet, to stay small, to stay exactly where they needed me to be. I shook my head slowly. I can't do this, I said, not anymore. Her hand reached for mine. But I pulled back, and without another word, I turned and walked down the steps into the cold, leaving the house, and the version of myself they wanted me to be, behind. The night swallowed me whole. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't have a plan. All I knew was that staying meant dying a slow, invisible death, and I refused to let that happen. By the time I got back to my apartment downtown, my hands were numb and my mind was racing. I tossed my keys onto the counter, kicked off my heels, and collapsed onto the couch, burying my face in my hands. How had it come to this? Everything I'd worked for, every late-night study session, every internship, every courtroom win, and it still wasn't enough to outweigh the fact that I was born with the wrong chromosomes. The worst part? It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every little girl who would grow up thinking she had to smile and nod and sit pretty because someone like Henry Mercer decided she wasn't enough. And I realized right then, I wasn't just angry. I was done. The next morning, while the city still slept under a thick blanket of frost, I was packing, not for a vacation, not for a quick break to cool off. No, I was leaving, permanently. I threw clothes into a suitcase, barely caring what I grabbed. My hands were shaking, but not from cold, from adrenaline, from the kind of raw, electric fury that could level cities if you pointed it in the right direction. And I was going to point it exactly where it needed to go. Halfway through stuffing my laptop and case files into a bag, my phone buzzed across the counter. It was Grant. Typical. Probably calling to gloat, to rub salt into wounds he probably didn't even realize he'd helped inflict. I stared at the phone, heart pounding. Then I hit decline. I didn't owe him, or any of them, a damn thing. I was halfway to the front door when another buzz came through. This time, a text. Grant, hope you're cooling off. Sis, don't do anything stupid. It's not like you could ever handle the firm anyway. The words hit harder than I wanted to admit. And just like that, twist, the anger crystallized into something else. Resolve. I wasn't just leaving to lick my wounds anymore. I was leaving to build something better. Something they could never touch. Something they would someday wish they hadn't lost. I grabbed my suitcase, squared my shoulders, and walked out. Not running, not crying, walking, with my head held high. Because sometimes the loudest revenge isn't slamming doors or screaming until your throat bleeds. Sometimes it's silence, steel in your spine, and the quiet, unshakable promise to yourself that you will become unstoppable. Even if it kills you. The first few days felt like floating. Not in the good way, like a balloon drifting into blue skies. No, it was the kind of floating where your feet can't find the ground and every step feels like it might send you crashing into pieces you can't put back together. I moved into a small apartment downtown. Nothing like the sprawling Mercer estate. With its manicured gardens and imported marble floors. This place had cracks in the ceiling, a heater that rattled at night, and a faint smell of old paint. But it was mine. Every rent check, every bill, every sleepless night spent worrying about whether I could make it, it was all mine. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living under someone else's roof. Or their expectations. I got a job within a week. Thanks to a connection from one of my professors at Harvard. It wasn't glamorous, an associate position at a mid-sized firm that handled everything from messy divorces to corporate lawsuits, but it was a start. They didn't care who my father was. They cared about how hard I worked. And God, I worked. Late nights, early mornings, coffee and ambition pumping through my veins like blood. Every case file, every client meeting, every courtroom appearance, I treated it like it mattered more than breathing. Because it did. I wasn't just fighting to prove myself anymore. I was fighting to exist. One evening, after a particularly brutal deposition, I stayed late at the office, combing through a mountain of paperwork for a new case that had just landed on my desk. It was big, a multi-million-dollar litigation between two corporate giants. The kind of case that could either bury a young associate in paperwork, or launch them into the stratosphere if they played it right. I was determined to be the latter. I flipped through the file, highlighting key points, making notes, mapping out strategies in my mind. And then I saw it. I froze, my pen slipping from my fingers. There, on the list of opposing counsel, printed in crisp black letters, Mercer and Associates. My chest tightened. No, it couldn't be. I scanned the case summary again. Heart pounding. Sure enough, the plaintiff, our client, was suing Mercer and Associates for breach of contract and professional negligence. And they had a real shot at winning. I leaned back in my chair, the air suddenly feeling too thin, too sharp. This wasn't just another case anymore. This was personal. This was the universe handing me a loaded gun and asking if I had the guts to pull the trigger. Part of me wanted to push the file away. Tell my boss Richard I couldn't take it. That it was too close. Too messy. Too dangerous. But the other part, the part that still burned with every condescending word my father had ever said. With every dismissive glance Grant had ever thrown, knew better. This was my shot. Not just to win. To show them. To make them look across a courtroom and realize what they'd thrown away. To make them regret underestimating me. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the file, feeling the weight of the choice settle into my bones. And then, slowly, I smiled. Not a soft, hopeful smile. A sharp one. The kind that tasted like steel and vengeance and freedom. The next morning, I walked into Richard's office with the file clutched in my hand. I want it, I said, my voice steady. The Mercer case. I want to lead it. He raised an eyebrow, studying me for a long moment. You sure? He asked. It's going to get messy. They'll throw everything they have at us. I'm sure, I said, more than I've ever been. He nodded once, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Good, he said, let's show them what you're made of. And just like that, it was decided. I spent the next few weeks buried in prep work, building the case piece by piece like a fortress they couldn't knock down. Every deposition, every motion filed, every strategy session, I poured myself into it with a hunger I hadn't felt since law school. And as the court date drew closer, I could feel it building inside me, the storm. The part of me that had been quiet for so long, waiting, simmering, was finally waking up, not just angry, not just hurt, focused, deadly. The night before the first hearing, I sat by the window of my tiny apartment, staring out at the city lights blinking against the dark. Tomorrow, I would walk into that courtroom. I would stand across from my father and my brother. And I wouldn't just be Catherine Mercer, the daughter they tried to silence. I would be the woman they never saw coming. The woman who would tear down everything they thought was untouchable. And I wouldn't flinch. Not this time. I leaned my head back against the wall, feeling the quiet hum of power settle into my bones. Tomorrow wasn't just another case. It was the beginning of the reckoning. And for the first time in a long time, I couldn't wait. The morning of the hearing, the world outside felt different. Sharper somehow. The air crisper. The sun harsher. Or maybe it was just me, standing there on the courthouse steps, heart hammering against my ribs, feeling like I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't come back from. This was it. No more family dinners. No more birthdays at the estate. No more pretending that blood was thicker than ambition. When I stepped into that courtroom, I wasn't Henry Mercer's daughter anymore. I was his opponent. I walked down the hall, heels clicking against the marble, the file clutched tight in my hand. My new armor. As I pushed open the heavy oak doors, the room buzzed with low conversation, the murmur of attorneys, the shuffle of papers, the squeak of leather chairs. And then I saw them. My father, Grant, sitting at the defense table, their heads bent together in hurried discussion. Grant's face was pink with frustration, waving his hands in that careless way he always had when he was in over his head. My father, stone-faced but tense, his fingers drumming sharply on the table. They didn't see me at first. But when they did, it was Grant who noticed first. His smirk faltered for just a second before snapping back into place. Cocky and forced. My father, he just stared. A flicker of something, uncertainty? Regret, crossed his features before he buried it beneath that cold, unreadable mask he always wore. I didn't flinch, didn't falter. I set my bag down, smoothed my skirt, and waited for the judge to call the session to order. When the gavel struck, the room snapped to attention. And so did I. Opening arguments were brutal. Grant stumbled through his points like a man grasping at straws, repeating buzzwords he barely understood, relying on name recognition instead of facts. I dismantled every argument he made with cold, surgical precision. By the time I finished my statement, even the court stenographer was leaning forward a little, hanging on my words. Grant tried to recover. He really did. But it was like watching someone try to patch a sinking boat with duct tape. The more he spoke, the deeper he dug himself. And the more the judge frowned. About an hour in, I caught my father watching me. Not with anger. With something worse. With fear. It was small, just a tightening of his jaw. A stiffening of his shoulders, but I saw it. And I knew in that moment he realized. He had backed the wrong horse. The twist hit around the second cross-examination. Grant fumbled a crucial timeline. Badly. He mixed up dates, figures, even basic client communications, things no decent attorney would ever mess up under oath. I pressed hard. Grant's answers grew more desperate, more defensive, until finally, he snapped at the judge. Snapped. In open court. It was like the entire room gasped in unison. The judge's face hardened instantly. Mr. Mercer, he said sharply, voice booming across the room. One more outburst like that, and you'll be held in contempt. Grant mumbled an apology, his face burning red. Across the courtroom, I could almost feel the Mercer name crumbling, brick by brick, and standing behind it, watching it all collapse, was Henry, motionless, silent, broken. The hearing adjourned for lunch, and as the courtroom emptied, I gathered my papers calmly, methodically. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my father approaching. Alone. Grant stormed out ahead of him, shoving the door open so hard it banged against the wall. I didn't look up. Not until he spoke. You've gotten better, my father said quietly, almost like he was speaking to himself. I finally met his gaze. No, Dad, I said, my voice even. I was always good. You just never bothered to see it. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something else. Maybe apologize. Maybe beg. But for once, he didn't. He just nodded once, stiff, awkward, and turned away. I watched him go, feeling nothing. No triumph. No rage. Just a cold, steady certainty that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. When the afternoon session resumed, the tide had fully turned. The settlement offer came before we even finished the second round of arguments. It wasn't just a win. It was a rout. I sat there, signing the final documents, knowing that the Mercer name would never be the same after this. And neither would I, as I gathered my things, ready to walk out of that courtroom and never look back. I caught a glimpse of my father one last time. He was standing alone by the defense table. His shoulders slumped, the weight of years and pride and mistakes finally too much to carry. For a brief second, he looked older than I had ever seen him. Smaller. I turned away without another glance. Because this wasn't about hurting him anymore. It was about saving myself. And sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't about breaking them. It's about building yourself so high they can never reach you again. The final gavel struck like a gunshot. It echoed through the courtroom, reverberating off the marble walls, sealing it all in stone. Case closed. Mercer and Associates, humiliated. Catherine Mercer, victorious. I stood there for a moment, still gripping my briefcase tightly, letting the reality sink in. I had done it, without their name, without their blessing, without their help. And the world had seen it. My client shook my hand, their gratitude evident in every word they stumbled to say. But my eyes flickered past them, toward the defense table, now deserted. Grant had bolted the second the session ended. Coward to the end, my father lingered longer, long enough to watch me pack up my files with cold precision. Long enough to see that I wasn't walking out of that room defeated. I was ascending, and he couldn't follow. When I pushed through the courthouse doors into the Texas sun, it was blinding, but not as blinding as the clarity cutting through my chest. I wasn't just free, I was unstoppable. By the time I got back to Hayes and Company, the news had already spread. Applause erupted the moment I stepped into the bullpen. My colleagues grinned, clapped me on the back, handed me a glass of champagne they'd apparently been saving just for this. "You crushed them," one of the senior associates said, shaking his head in awe. "I almost feel bad for Grant Mercer." Someone else joked. "Almost." Richard Hayes himself emerged from his office, his expression unreadable, but there was a gleam in his eye I hadn't seen before. "Catherine," he said, his voice loud enough for the whole floor to hear. "Join me in my office." The chatter around me dropped instantly to a hush. I followed him in, pulse hammering in my ears. He closed the door behind me, then turned, his face breaking into a grin. "You didn't just win that case," he said. "You sent a message." I swallowed hard, my heart racing. "Thank you, Richard. I just did my job." He chuckled. "No, Catherine, you did more than your job. You elevated this entire firm's profile in one afternoon." He paced for a second, thoughtful. Then he turned back to me. "I wasn't going to do this until the end of the quarter," he said, "but after today, it's clear we need to move faster." He opened a drawer, pulled out a slim, leather-bound folder, and slid it across the desk toward me. I blinked, confused, then picked it up. Inside was a formal offer. Promotion. Partner. Effective immediately. My jaw tightened against the emotion surging in my throat. Youngest partner in Hayes and Company history. 6 months earlier, I was being told I didn't belong anywhere but someone's arm at a charity gala. Now, I was being asked to sit at the table. Not because of my last name. Because of my skill, my grit, my wins. Richard leaned forward, his tone softer now. "This is just the beginning. Catherine, you have the makings of a giant. And I want you to build your legacy right here, with us." For a moment, I couldn't speak, couldn't move. All I could think about was the little girl who used to sit outside her father's study door, listening to him talk about cases he never thought she'd understand. The teenager who buried herself in law textbooks while Grant stumbled through summer school. The woman who had once believed that no matter how hard she fought, her worth would always be weighed against her gender. I looked up at Richard, my voice steady. "I accept." He smiled, a real smile this time, and stood, offering his hand. I shook it firmly, and just like that, a new chapter began. Later that evening, after the champagne had been poured and the congratulations had faded into the warm buzz of celebration, I found myself alone in my office, staring out at the glittering Dallas skyline. I should have been basking in it, but something tugged at the edges of my mind. Unfinished business. Sure enough, around 9:30, my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. But somehow, I knew. I answered. Catherine. My father's voice rasped through the speaker. I stayed silent. He cleared his throat. I heard about your promotion. Another beat of silence. I wanted to say, congratulations. It was stiff. Forced. Like pulling teeth from a man who had spent a lifetime believing pride was weakness. But it was something. I exhaled slowly. Thank you. There was a long pause. Then, you were extraordinary in that courtroom. Another beat. I was wrong. The words stumbled out, halting and heavy. Not just an admission. An unraveling. I was wrong about you. About everything. I see that now. I closed my eyes, pressing the phone tighter to my ear. For a brief, fleeting second, I wanted to let it be enough. Wanted to patch over the hurt with those fragile words. But I couldn't. Not completely. Because too much had been lost. Too much had been burned. I appreciate that, Dad, I said quietly, but it doesn't change the past. No, he whispered, it doesn't. And then, almost so faint I barely caught it. I'm proud of you, Catherine. I always should have been. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Good night, Dad. And I hung up. I sat there for a long time after. The city lights blurring into a shimmering haze outside the window. Maybe forgiveness wasn't about letting people off the hook. Maybe it was about letting yourself move forward without dragging the chains of their failures behind you. I was free now, truly. And tomorrow, when I walked into Hayes & Company, it wouldn't be as Henry Mercer's daughter. It would be as Catherine Mercer. Partner. The girl who didn't just inherit a legacy. She built her own. The next morning, the city felt different. Not louder, not faster. Just clearer. As if overnight, something inside me had snapped into place. I stood by my apartment window, sipping coffee, letting the early sunlight spill across the hardwood floors. The phone lay silent on the kitchen counter, a stark contrast to the chaos it had carried these past few weeks. No missed calls from home. No desperate texts. No guilt clawing at the edges. Just quiet. Just peace. For the first time in my life. It didn't feel like something was missing. It felt like something had finally been set down. At Hayes & Company, the congratulations continued. More handshakes. More nods of respect. My name was already being whispered in meetings I wasn't even attending yet. Partner this. Partner that. It felt good. It felt earned. Still, by mid-afternoon, the old ache started creeping back in, the one that always came after big wins. The one that whispered, they should have been here for this. I pushed it down. I focused on the work. I kept moving. Until around 4 o'clock, when Richard stopped by my office. You've got a visitor, he said carefully, leaning against the doorframe. I glanced up from my laptop. Who? He hesitated. Your mother. For a moment, I just stared at him. Then I closed my laptop slowly, setting it aside. Send her in. My heart pounded harder with every second that passed. Then the door opened, and there she was, elegant as always, though today there was a tightness in her shoulders I hadn't seen before. She clutched her purse with both hands like it was the only thing keeping her steady. Catherine, she said softly. Mom, I replied, my voice neutral. She sat down carefully in the chair across from me, her movements precise, almost fragile. I heard about your promotion, she said. Your father told me. I nodded once, saying nothing. He's proud of you, she added, her voice cracking just slightly. I didn't respond. I let the silence stretch until she cleared her throat nervously. Catherine, she said again, softer now. He wants to offer you something. Officially. I raised an eyebrow. A full partnership, she continued, at Mercer and Associates. Name on the door, equal say in operations, everything you were denied before. The air between us thickened. He's prepared to step down, she added, almost in a whisper. He wants you to take over. For a moment, I said nothing, just sat there, staring at the woman who had watched me fight for scraps of recognition my whole life, and said nothing. And now, they wanted me back. Now, They wanted me to fix what they broke. I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. And what about Grant? I asked quietly. Her lips pressed into a thin line. He'll remain as senior counsel. But the firm, it would be yours. Catherine. I swallowed hard. This should have felt like a triumph. It should have felt like justice. Instead, it felt like chains being offered in a prettier box. I stared out the window for a long moment before speaking. I spent years begging for a seat at that table. I said finally. I bled for it. I fought for it. And when I needed you, when I needed him, you turned your backs on me. She flinched, but didn't deny it. And now that you're losing, now that you realize what you gave up, now you want me? Tears welled in her eyes. But she blinked them back fiercely. We were wrong, she whispered. We see that now. I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time. I didn't feel like a desperate daughter pleading for love she could never earn. I felt like a woman standing at a crossroads. One road led back, to a life shaped by their expectations. Their guilt, their belated approval. The other led forward, into something I built with my own hands. My own name, my own worth. And standing there, in the office I had earned without them, the choice was blindingly clear. I shook my head slowly. I'm not coming back, I said, my voice steady. Tears slipped down her cheeks now, silent and unstoppable. But Catherine, no, I said gently but firmly. I needed you to believe in me before I won. Not after. I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. I hope the firm survives. I added quietly. I hope Grant figures out who he wants to be. And I hope you find peace with the choices you made. She rose shakily, clutching her purse tighter. I'm proud of you, she said, voice trembling. I smiled, small, bittersweet. I'm proud of me too, I said, finally. She hesitated, then turned and walked out of the office. And just like that, the last chain slipped away. I sank back into my chair, the late afternoon sun warming my face. There were no cheers, no fireworks, just the soft hum of the city outside and the quiet, exhilarating rush of freedom inside my chest. Later that night, sitting on my balcony with a glass of wine, I thought about legacy. Not the kind you inherit. Not the kind built on someone else's name. The kind you carve yourself. Scar by scar, choice by choice. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their seat at their table. I was building a bigger table somewhere else, and this time, I would choose who sat beside me. I leaned back, staring at the stars scattered across the Dallas sky, and I whispered to myself, not out of anger, not out of bitterness, but out of fierce, unbreakable hope. I am not the daughter they underestimated. I am the woman they could never control. And for the first time in my life, that was enough.